Hey everyone, thanks for being here. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know. Now, let's get into this. What happens when the government captures something that shouldn't exist? What do you do with a creature that can see through any lie, any facade, any carefully constructed identity? I was hired to find out. I was trained for interrogation, psychological assessment, threat evaluation. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found in that cell, or what it knew about me, about my family, about the people walking those halls every single day. Let's begin. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I did, where I worked, and what I learned before everything collapsed. For 11 years, I served as a forensic psychiatrist for a division of the government that operates outside official channels. No congressional oversight, no public accountability. The facility itself exists on no map, buried 300 feet beneath what surface records show as an abandoned military depot in rural Nevada, 40 miles from the nearest town. We don't process criminals there. We contain entities. The official term is non-human intelligence detention and research. But everyone who works below simply calls it holding. Over the decades, holding has accumulated 17 confirmed entities. Some were captured during military operations overseas. Others surfaced during domestic incidents that required immediate federal suppression and media blackout. A few were voluntarily surrendered by private organizations that couldn't manage them anymore. My role was assessment. I conducted psychological evaluations, established behavioral baselines, identified manipulation tactics, and determined containment risk levels. It sounds clinical because it had to be. The moment you start thinking of them as monsters, you lose objectivity. The moment you lose objectivity, you become vulnerable. I learned that lesson early. The facility itself resembled a pharmaceutical research lab more than a prison. White walls, sterile lighting, airlock doors with biometric scanners. Every corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled air. Security personnel wore plain gray uniforms without insignia. Researchers dressed in business casual. Nothing about the environment suggested we were housing things that violated every known law of biology and physics. But we were. Sublevel 3 contained the maximum containment cells. Reinforced titanium walls. Electromagnetic shielding. Constant video surveillance. Each cell was designed specifically for its occupants' unique properties. Some entities required complete sensory deprivation. Others needed specific atmospheric conditions or temperature controls. One cell maintained total darkness because the occupant's physical form destabilized under direct light. I had clearance to access all 17 files, though direct interaction was limited to cases requiring psychological evaluation. Most entities didn't communicate. They either couldn't or wouldn't. The few that did speak usually cycled through threats, religious proclamations, or incoherent rambling that analysis teams spent months trying to decode. Then Subject 18 arrived. I first heard about the capture during a staff meeting 3 weeks ago. Dr. Mitchell Reeves, the facility's senior research director, called an emergency briefing for all personnel with level 4 clearance or higher. 11 of us gathered in conference room B, a windowless space dominated by a long metal table and a wall-mounted screen. Reeves stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back. He was 58, lean with steel gray hair, and the permanent expression of someone perpetually calculating outcomes. I'd worked under him for 7 years. He was brilliant, meticulous, and utterly humorless. "We've acquired a new subject," he began without preamble. "Captured 6 days ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma, following a 14-month investigation. Preliminary classification suggests enhanced persuasive capability, possibly mimetic in nature." The screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a photograph of an ordinary-looking man, mid-30s, average height, brown hair, unremarkable features. He could have been anyone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. "That's it?" someone asked. I think it was Hernandez from Biomedical. "He looks completely normal." "Appearance is irrelevant," Reeves said flatly. Subject 18 was identified after 17 individuals in the Tulsa metro area, exhibited spontaneous behavioral modification following direct verbal contact. These individuals subsequently recruited others through similar interactions. By the time federal assets intervened, the affected population exceeded 200. I leaned forward. What kind of behavioral modification? Abandonment of prior responsibilities, liquidation of personal assets, relocation to a single address. All subjects described feeling called or chosen. When questioned, none could articulate why they'd made these decisions. They simply knew they had to. The room went quiet. Standard cult recruitment? I suggested. Reeves shook his head. Initial assessment suggested that. However, deprogramming efforts failed completely. Pharmaceutical intervention had no effect. Even full sensory isolation didn't break the conditioning. Whatever Subject 18 does, it operates on a level we haven't encountered before. He tapped the screen, bringing up a new image, the same man, now restrained in what looked like a mobile containment unit. His eyes were covered with a black hood. Noise-canceling headphones covered his ears. His mouth was secured with a specialized gag that prevented all vocalization. Containment protocol requires complete communication suppression, Reeves continued. No verbal contact, no written communication, no physical proximity without full protective equipment. As of now, Subject 18 has been in isolation for 6 days. He's shown no signs of physical distress, no attempts at escape, and no aggressive behavior. Then why the extreme measures? Asked Lena Ortiz, one of the facility's senior security technicians. She sat across from me, arms crossed, dark eyes fixed on the screen with professional skepticism. Because every agent involved in the initial capture reported intrusive thoughts within 72 hours, Reeves said. Vivid dreams, compulsive ideation about releasing the subject. 3 agents required psychiatric hospitalization. 2 are still under observation. That got everyone's attention. And you want someone to interview it? I said slowly. Reeves turned to me. You specifically. You have the most extensive experience with manipulative entities. Your psychological resistance scores are the highest on staff, and you've maintained perfect evaluation records across 43 prior assessments. I didn't respond immediately. 43 assessments, yes, but none of those entities had affected trained federal agents just through brief exposure. None had triggered psychological breaks in people specifically selected for mental resilience. What's the objective? I asked. Information. We need to understand how it functions, what it wants, whether it represents a broader threat, standard protocol, establish baseline communication, identify cognitive patterns, assess containment viability. And if it tries to influence me? We'll be monitoring in real time. Neurological scanning, voice stress analysis, behavioral observation. The moment we detect compromise, the session ends. You'll undergo immediate psychological evaluation and quarantine if necessary. I looked at the image on the screen again. The hooded figure in restraints. Something about it bothered me, though I couldn't articulate what. Maybe it was the posture, too relaxed for someone in maximum containment. Or maybe it was the knowledge that this unremarkable-looking person had fundamentally altered the lives of hundreds of people with nothing but words. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning. Auto 800 hours. Interview room 7. Full protocol. The meeting adjourned 20 minutes later. As people filed out, Lena caught up with me in the corridor. You really going through with this? She asked quietly. I'd worked with Lena for 4 years. She was 31, former military police, and one of the few people in holding who treated the job with healthy skepticism rather than either clinical detachment or obsessive fascination. We'd developed an easy professional rapport built on mutual respect and shared gallows humor about working in a place that officially didn't exist. Don't have much choice, I said. Reeves already made the assignment. You always have a choice. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Look, I've seen the preliminary reports. This thing, whatever it is, it got inside people's heads without even trying. Trained agents, people with psychological screening and resistance training. And now Reeves wants you in a room with it for an extended session? With full monitoring and safety protocols. Protocols. She made a dismissive sound. You know as well as I do that half our protocols are theoretical. We're making this up as we go because nothing like this should exist in the first place. She wasn't wrong. For all our procedures and containment measures, we were fundamentally improvising. You can't create a manual for imprisoning things that violate natural law. I'll be careful, I said. Lena studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Just remember, if something feels wrong, if anything seems off, you abort immediately. Don't try to tough it out. Don't convince yourself you can handle it. These things don't play fair. Noted. She squeezed my shoulder once, then headed toward the security wing. I watched her go, then made my way to my office on sublevel 2. The rest of the day passed in preparation. I reviewed every piece of available documentation on Subject 18. The initial incident reports from Tulsa, surveillance footage of the affected individuals, transcripts of their interviews, medical workups showing no physiological abnormalities despite their complete behavioral transformation. One detail kept surfacing. Every affected individual described the experience the same way. They'd been going about normal activities when they encountered Subject 18, sometimes at a grocery store, sometimes on the street, once at a bus stop. The conversations were brief, unremarkable. Topics ranged from weather to local news to casual pleasantries. But afterwards, something shifted. They couldn't explain what changed. Only that they suddenly understood something they hadn't before, that they'd been living incorrectly. That correction was necessary. That Subject 18 represented something important, something true, something that demanded acknowledgement. When pressed for specifics, their answers became circular and vague. It wasn't about belief or ideology. It wasn't about following instructions. It was described more like recognition, seeing something that had always been there but invisible until pointed out. That troubled me more than overt mind control would have. I left the office at 1900 hours and drove to my apartment in Henderson, about 30 miles from the facility. Company housing would have been more convenient. But I'd learned early that maintaining some separation between work and personal life was essential for psychological stability. Too many staff members lived on site and gradually lost perspective, treating holding as their entire reality. My apartment was modest. One bedroom, minimal furniture, walls decorated with nothing personal, just generic landscape prints that came with the place. I'd lived there for 11 years, but it still felt temporary, like I was staying in a hotel that I simply hadn't checked out of yet. I made dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, mechanical and tasteless. I ate while reviewing my notes on a tablet, trying to formulate an interview strategy. Standard approaches wouldn't work. Building rapport was dangerous when the subject could potentially hijack the process. Aggressive interrogation was pointless if the entity had no fear response. Academic inquiry might provide information but could also give the subject opportunity to redirect the conversation. I needed to maintain absolute control while appearing open to dialogue. A difficult balance. My phone buzzed. Text from Reeves. Interview moved to 0700. Preparation briefing at 0630. Don't be late. I acknowledged and set 3 alarms. Sleep came eventually, though it took longer than usual. I kept thinking about those interview transcripts, about people who'd abandoned their entire lives based on brief conversations with an unremarkable stranger, about trained federal agents experiencing psychological breaks after minimal exposure, about what might happen when I sat across from it tomorrow. When the alarms went off at 5:30, I felt like I'd barely slept. I showered, dressed in standard business attire, and made the drive back to the facility while dawn was still just a suggestion on the horizon. Security clearance took 15 minutes. Biometric scan, retinal verification, psychological baseline test administered by AI to detect any overnight compromise. All clear. Reeves met me in briefing room C at precisely 0630. Also present were Dr. Alan Frost from neurology, Captain James Brenner from security, and 2 technicians I didn't recognize. Status? Reeves asked Frost. Subject remained passive throughout the night. No vocalization attempts despite the gag being removed for feeding at 200. Consumed standard meal without resistance. Vital signs completely normal, almost aggressively normal actually. Heart rate steady at 62 BPM, respiration at 14, no REM sleep deviation. Behavioral anomalies? None. He sits. He eats when provided food. He uses the facilities when necessary, but there's something about the body language that reads as performative, like he's demonstrating compliance rather than actually being compliant. I frowned. That's a subjective assessment. I'm aware, Frost said, but I've observed 17 subjects over 6 years. This one's different. It's too perfect, like watching an actor play prisoner rather than actually being one. Reeves turned to Brenner. Security status? Interview room 7 is prepared, triple redundant video monitoring, audio recording on 6 separate systems, panic button installed within your reach, Doctor. I'll have 4 personnel stationed outside with tranquilizer protocols ready. Room is electromagnetically isolated and equipped with white noise generation, if emergency suppression becomes necessary. Transport procedure? Subject will be moved in full restraints, ankles, wrists, and torso harness, hood and gag until secured in the interview chair. 2 guards minimum at all times. The chair itself is bolted to the floor and equipped with backup restraints if needed. I listened to all of this while reviewing the facility layout on a wall screen. Interview room 7 was in the maximum containment wing, surrounded by buffer zones and emergency lockdown doors. If something went wrong, I'd be trapped inside with the subject until security could extract me. Neural monitoring? Reeves asked the technicians. The younger one, a woman with pulled-back blonde hair, spoke up. We've adapted the setup from the mimetic hazard protocols. You'll be wearing a modified EEG cap disguised as a protective headband. Real-time monitoring for unusual neural activity, particularly in regions associated with decision-making and self-concept. If we detect patterns consistent with external influence, we'll trigger immediate termination. Detection reliability? 87% in controlled testing, but this is new territory. We can't guarantee it'll catch everything. Reeves nodded slowly, then looked at me. Final clearance check. Any reservations? Any psychological or physical issues that might compromise your performance? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to cite Lena's warnings, the incident reports, the fact that we were clearly dealing with something beyond our understanding, but I also knew that someone had to do this. That understanding these entities was the entire purpose of holding. That backing out now would likely end my career and result in someone less prepared taking my place. No reservations, I lied. Good. Subject transport begins in 15 minutes. You'll enter the interview room first and establish position. We'll bring subject 18 in afterward. Remember, maintain psychological distance. Don't engage emotionally. If you experience intrusive thoughts, compulsive ideation, or sensory distortions, signal immediately. Your safety is secondary to preventing compromise. That last part was standard protocol phrasing, but it still landed with uncomfortable weight. We moved through the facility in silence. Sublevel 3's corridors were narrower than the upper levels, with lower ceilings and harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. Armed guards stood at each checkpoint. Every door required separate authorization. Interview room 7 looked exactly like its predecessors, 12 by 12 feet. Concrete walls painted institutional beige, no windows, 1 metal table bolted to the floor with 2 chairs on opposite sides. The only additions were the camera housings in all 4 ceiling corners and the small red button mounted on my side of the table, the panic button. I took my seat and waited while technicians fitted the monitoring headband and tested the systems. The equipment was surprisingly lightweight, just a thin band across my forehead with small sensors that felt like gentle pressure points. All systems green, the technician confirmed. Neural baseline established, you're live. Reeves's voice came through a hidden speaker. Subject transport in progress. Stand by. I folded my hands on the table and focused on my breathing. Slow, controlled, present. The door opened. 2 security guards entered first, moving with practiced efficiency to flank the entrance. Then came Subject 18. He shuffled rather than walked, movement restricted by ankle chains. His wrists were secured to a waist restraint. A black hood still covered his head. The guards guided him to the chair opposite mine and secured him to the bolted frame with additional straps across his chest and thighs. Once locked in place, one guard removed the hood. I got my first direct look at Subject 18's face, completely unremarkable. Brown hair, slightly thinning, pale skin, thin lips, eyes that were neither particularly dark nor light, just a muddy hazel. The kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. The kind of person who could stand next to you in an elevator without registering as memorable, except for the expression. He wasn't afraid, wasn't angry, wasn't curious or defiant or resigned. He simply looked at me with calm, patient attention. Like a professor waiting for a student to finish forming a question, the guards exited and sealed the door. The lock's magnetic clunk echoed in the small space. We sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds. I let it stretch, observing. His breathing was steady, no nervous tics or fidgeting despite the restraints. His gaze never wavered from my face, but somehow didn't feel aggressive or invasive, just attentive. Finally, I spoke. "I'm Dr. Cross. I'm here to conduct a psychological evaluation. Do you understand the purpose of this interview?" His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of something mildly amusing. "Yes," he said. His voice was ordinary. Tenor range, slight Midwestern flatness to the vowels. No menace, no artificial charm, just a normal voice. "You're here to determine whether I'm dangerous, whether I can be contained, whether I represent a threat that requires elimination." "That's part of it," I admitted. "I'm also here to understand how you function, what you are, what you want, what I want." He considered this. "I want to leave, obviously, but I understand that's not currently viable. What I am is more complicated. What I represent would take longer to explain than this session will allow." I made a note on the tablet mounted to my side of the table. "Let's start simple. What should I call you?" "Names are functionally irrelevant. Call me whatever helps you maintain professional distance." "You seem very aware of how this process works." "I've observed humans long enough to understand institutional psychology. You need to categorize me, define boundaries, establish a framework that makes me comprehensible. That's natural, that's survival instinct. How long have you been observing humans?" The almost smile returned. "Define observing. Define human. You're already making assumptions about what I am based on physical appearance and behavioral patterns. Those assumptions will limit your understanding. Then correct my assumptions. Help me understand." He tilted his head slightly, studying me with that unsettling patience. "You're approaching this as an interrogation disguised as conversation. You want me to provide information while revealing nothing yourself. But that dynamic won't work here because I already know more about you than you know about me." My stomach tightened slightly. "What do you think you know about me?" "I know you're 41 years old. I know you've worked in this facility for 11 years, conducting psychological evaluations on 17 entities before me. I know you live alone in Henderson, Nevada, in a one-bedroom apartment that you've never bothered to properly furnish because you don't actually think of it as home. I know you eat the same 6 meals on rotation because cooking feels like wasted effort. I know you haven't had a meaningful romantic relationship in 7 years because intimacy requires vulnerability that your work has trained you to suppress." Every word was accurate. My heart rate increased. I felt it, and I knew the monitoring systems were registering it, but I kept my expression neutral. "Impressive research," I said calmly, "though most of that information is accessible through personnel files and basic surveillance." "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly, as much as the restraints allowed. "Tell me, doctor, do your personnel files mention that you chose this career specifically because your father disappeared when you were 16? That you've spent your entire professional life trying to understand inexplicable human behavior because you never got answers about why he left? That every entity you've evaluated has been, on some level, a proxy for him?" The room felt suddenly smaller. I forced myself to maintain eye contact. "You're attempting to establish psychological leverage through personal information. That's manipulation 101. I'm demonstrating capability, he corrected gently. You need to understand what you're dealing with before we can have an honest conversation. And doctor, we need to have an honest conversation. Why? Because there are others like me working in this facility. Because you've been surrounded by my kind for years without realizing it. Because one of them has been watching you very carefully since you arrived here. My mouth went dry. That's an obvious destabilization tactic. Create paranoia, undermine trust in colleagues, make me question everything. It is, he agreed. And it's also true. Both things can coexist. Reeves's voice crackled through the speaker. Dr. Cross, neural activity showing elevated stress response. Do you need to pause? I pressed the calm button on the table. Negative. Proceeding. I turned back to subject 18. Let's say I entertain this claim. How would you demonstrate it? I can't. Not directly. Demonstrating it would require naming individuals, and the moment I do that, you'll dismiss it as guesswork or accessible information. The only way you'll believe me is through your own observation, through noticing the inconsistencies that have always been there, but that you've trained yourself to overlook because acknowledging them would destabilize your entire understanding of this place. Convenient. Frustrating, actually, he said, with what seemed like genuine annoyance. I'm trying to warn you, and the structure of human cognition makes it nearly impossible to accept warnings about fundamental reality. Your brain will do everything it can to reject what I'm telling you, to find alternative explanations, to maintain the worldview that lets you function. That's not weakness, that's just how your species survives. You keep saying your species as if you're not human. I'm not. I'm wearing something that resembles human form, but that's cosmetic. What I actually am doesn't have a direct correlation in your language or conceptual framework. I made another note. Then describe it in metaphor. Give me something approximating understanding. He was quiet for a long moment, and for the first time his expression shifted to something that might have been consideration. Imagine, he finally said, that consciousness isn't generated by brains but received by them. That brains are antennae, and what you call self is actually a broadcast from somewhere else. Now imagine there are other broadcasts, other frequencies, some compatible with human receivers, some not. What I am is a different frequency that learned to broadcast on your band. Why? Because your frequency is temporary and unstable. Because the entities that generate your broadcasts are fragile and inconsistent. Because my kind recognized opportunity in that fragmentation. A chill ran through me despite the room's controlled temperature. Opportunity for what? Influence, integration, eventually replacement, not through force, through invitation, through showing humans what they could become if they stopped limiting themselves to single frequencies. That sounds like justification for the Tulsa incident. 200 people didn't choose to abandon their lives. You manipulated them. Did I? He tilted his head again. Or did I simply show them a truth they'd been ignoring, that their previous lives were constructs based on arbitrary social conditioning, that they were performing roles rather than living authentically? Every person I spoke with in Tulsa made their own decisions. I didn't force anything. I just asked questions that revealed contradictions they'd been suppressing. Questions that triggered complete behavioral modification. Questions that triggered liberation from unconscious programming. You see destruction. They experience freedom. The difference is perspective. I felt my jaw tighten. This was exactly what the reports warned about. The entity's ability to reframe manipulation as enlightenment, to make profound psychological violation sound like personal growth. Let's return to your claim about facility staff, I said, steering away from philosophical territory. You said there are others like you working here. Yes. How many? At least 4 that I've directly observed. Possibly more in sections I haven't accessed. They've been here for years. Some were here before you arrived. And their purpose? Study, maintenance, ensuring this facility serves its actual function. Which is? Subject 18 met my eyes with absolute certainty. It isn't containment, Doctor. It never was. The statement hung in the air between us like smoke, visible but intangible, impossible to grasp directly. I should have terminated the session right then. Protocol demanded it. Any claim designed to undermine facility security or staff confidence was grounds for immediate cessation. But something kept me in that chair, staring at this ordinary-looking person who spoke with such absolute conviction about impossible things. "Explain," I heard myself say. Subject 18 settled back slightly, his posture relaxing despite the restraints. This facility was established 43 years ago under the pretense of studying non-human entities, substantial federal funding, black budget allocation, recruitment of the best minds in psychology, biology, security, all presented as protective research, understanding threats before they become unmanageable. That's accurate to the historical record. The historical record is carefully curated. What isn't documented is who actually initiated the project. What entities were brought here first? What deals were made to secure cooperation from beings who could have simply refused capture? I kept my voice level. You're suggesting the entities allowed themselves to be contained. Some did. Others were genuinely captured, yes. But the initial subjects, the first 5 brought to this facility, they came willingly. They came because they were offered something. What? Access. A steady supply of human consciousness to study, to influence, to gradually reshape. Think about it, Doctor. How many staff members have worked here over 4 decades? Hundreds. How many entities have been processed through these cells? 17 currently, but dozens more over the years. And what happens to the staff who leave? I didn't answer. I was thinking about the orientation materials I'd reviewed 11 years ago. About the unusually high turnover rate that was explained as burnout from working with dangerous entities. About the exit interviews I'd never actually seen records of. They don't leave, Subject 18 said quietly. Not really. They transfer to other divisions, other agencies, other positions where they can continue serving purposes they don't consciously understand. This facility isn't a prison. It's a processing center. Humans come in, spend years in proximity to entities that slowly adjust their cognitive frequencies, then deploy back into the world, carrying modifications they aren't aware of. That's an elaborate theory. It's observable fact. You've been here 11 years, Doctor. Haven't you noticed the patterns? Staff members who seem slightly off after certain assignments, behavioral quirks that develop over time, the way some people start speaking in cadences that don't quite match their previous patterns. I thought about Jenkins from logistics, about how he'd developed a habit of pausing mid-sentence as if listening to something no one else could hear, about Rodriguez in medical who'd started insisting on specific dietary protocols that made no scientific sense, about a dozen other small anomalies I'd filed away as stress responses or personality evolution. Confirmation bias, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. You're describing normal human variation and attributing supernatural cause. Am I? Tell me about Dr. Mitchell Reeves. The sudden shift caught me off guard. What about him? How long has he directed this facility? 18 years. He was hired 6 years before my arrival. And before that? I realized I didn't know. Reeves never discussed his previous work. I'd assumed it was classified or simply private. I assume military or intelligence background. There's no record of Mitchell Reeves existing before he appeared at this facility 18 years ago. No birth certificate, no academic transcripts, no previous employment history. The identity was constructed specifically for this position. My hands were gripping the edge of the table. I forced them to relax. Personnel files for senior staff are heavily classified. You wouldn't have access. I don't need access to files. I can see what he is, the same way I can see the security chief who replaced Captain Morrison 3 years ago, the same way I can identify the medical director who's been here since the facility opened, but somehow looks no older than 40, the same way I recognized what was different about you the moment they brought me into this room. Everything in me wanted to dismiss this, to label it as manipulation, paranoid delusion, calculated psychological warfare. But there was something in his tone, not persuasive or coercive, just tired. like someone explaining basic mathematics to a student who keeps insisting 2 plus 2 equals 5. "What's different about me?" I asked. Subject 18 studied me for a long moment. "You're not compromised yet. You're still operating on your original frequency. That's rare after 11 years of exposure. It means either you have unusual resistance or they've been keeping you clean intentionally." "Why would they do that?" "Because you're useful as a baseline, a control subject, someone who can conduct genuine evaluations without interference, or because they're saving you for something specific." He paused. "Or because of your father." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "My father has nothing to do with this. Your father was taken when he turned 27. You were 16 at the time. He disappeared without explanation, without goodbye, without leaving any trace. The official story was voluntary abandonment, but you never believed that because it made no sense. He loved you. He was present. He was engaged. And then one day, he simply wasn't there anymore." My throat had gone tight. "How?" "Because the same thing that took him has been watching you your entire professional life, waiting, measuring, determining whether you inherited his potential or whether you're simply ordinary. Your father made an agreement before you were born. A transaction, access to certain knowledge in exchange for eventual collection. He thought he could avoid it. He thought understanding how these things work would let him slip the arrangement. He was wrong." "Stop. He didn't disappear, Doctor. He was claimed, brought to a place very much like this one, and the entity that claimed him has been observing you ever since, deciding whether you represent continuation of the contract or termination of the bloodline." I said stop. My voice came out harder than intended. The monitoring equipment had to be registering significant stress response now. But Reeves hadn't interrupted. The session was continuing. Why was the session continuing? Subject 18 leaned forward again, his expression shifting to something almost sympathetic. "I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to warn you. You're approaching your father's age when he was taken. You're in a facility surrounded by entities that have been watching you for over a decade, and you're starting to notice things that don't add up. That's not coincidence. That's deliberate. They're letting you see because the decision point is approaching." "What decision?" "Whether you accept the inheritance, whether you choose to understand what your father understood, whether you join willingly or get discarded as insufficient." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against concrete. "This interview is over." "Doctor, this interview is over," I repeated, hitting the comm button. "Requesting immediate extraction. Subject is engaging in targeted psychological manipulation." Static crackled. Then Reeves's voice, but different somehow. Flatter. "Specify nature of manipulation. Personal information. Family history. Designed to destabilize evaluator. Standard hostile interrogation reversal." A pause that stretched too long. "Maintain position. Concluding assessment. I'm terminating now." "Maintain position, Dr. Cross, that's a direct order." The channel went dead. I stared at the speaker housing, then at the door. Locked from outside. Controlled remotely. I was sealed in here until security decided otherwise. Subject 18 watched me with that same patient expression. "He's not going to let you out until he's certain of your response, until he knows whether what I've told you will take root or get dismissed. This is a test, Doctor, for both of us." "You orchestrated this." "No, but I saw it coming. The moment they assigned you to interview me, I knew this is what they actually wanted. Exposure. Revelation. A crisis point that would force developmental acceleration or psychological collapse." I returned to my chair slowly, mind racing through options. The panic button would summon security, but security answered to Reeves. The monitoring equipment meant every word was being recorded, every physiological response measured. There was no private space to think, to process, to determine what was real and what was elaborate manipulation. "Let's say you're telling the truth," I said carefully. "About the facility, about the staff, about my father. What am I supposed to do with that information?" "Investigate. Carefully. Start noticing the patterns you've been trained to overlook. Check records. Look for inconsistencies. Trust your own observations more than official explanations. And if I find evidence supporting your claims, then you'll have to make the same choice your father faced, except you'll have less time to decide. What choice? Subject 18 held my gaze. Whether to remain human or become something that can survive what's coming. Before I could respond, the door opened. 2 security guards entered, not the same ones who'd brought the subject in. These were larger, moving with mechanical precision. They unstrapped Subject 18 from the chair and replaced the hood without speaking. One of them looked at me. Dr. Cross, Dr. Reeves requests your presence in his office immediately. It wasn't phrased as a question. I followed them out, leaving Subject 18 secured in the interview room. The walk to Reeves' office took us through 3 checkpoints, each requiring separate authorization that the guards provided without breaking stride. Staff members we passed averted their eyes. No one made casual conversation. Reeves's office was on sublevel 2, a corner space that theoretically rated windows if we weren't underground. Instead, one wall displayed high-resolution screens showing forest landscapes, an unconvincing simulation of natural environment. His desk was military neat, single computer terminal, 1 active file folder, nothing personal or decorative. He stood when I entered, dismissed the guards with a gesture, and waited until the door sealed before speaking. Sit. I sat. He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, his default posture when delivering assessments or corrections. Interesting session, he said. Subject 18 demonstrated exactly the capabilities we suspected: invasive personal knowledge, targeted psychological manipulation, undermining institutional confidence, classic entity behavior. Yes, sir. Your neural monitoring showed elevated stress response but no indication of actual compromise. Your resistance held despite sustained psychological pressure. Well done. Thank you, sir. He studied me for a moment. But you're troubled. The subject made claims about facility operations, about staff, about your personal history, claims designed to generate paranoia and suspicion. That's my assessment as well. And yet you're wondering if there's any validity to those claims. If perhaps we're not telling you everything. If maybe the facility operates on principles you don't fully understand. I met his eyes. With respect, sir, that's natural skepticism after exposure to sophisticated manipulation. It doesn't indicate compromise. No, he agreed. It indicates healthy psychological resilience. You're questioning without accepting. Considering without believing. That's exactly the response we need. He moved to his desk, opened the folder. Which is why I'm going to provide context that very few people in this facility are cleared to know. He removed a photograph and slid it across the desk. My father's face looked back at me. The image was maybe 30 years old, judging by the clothing and photo quality. My father stood in front of a building I didn't recognize, younger than I'd ever known him, wearing a visitor's badge and looking directly at the camera with an expression I couldn't quite parse. Where was this taken? My voice came out steady somehow. Here, this facility, 17 months before you were born. Reeves pulled out additional photographs. My father with a group of people in lab coats. My father reviewing documents at a table. My father standing in what looked like an observation room, watching something beyond the frame. Your father was a consultant during Holding's early operational phases, Reeves continued. Specifically, he specialized in entity communication protocols. He had a unique aptitude for establishing cognitive bridges with non-human intelligence. He helped develop many of the interview techniques you currently use. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs. Why wasn't I informed? Because he violated protocol. He became too involved with one particular subject, Entity 7, started claiming it was communicating truths about reality that humans needed to understand, that containing these beings was preventing necessary human evolution. He tried to release Entity 7. We stopped him, but the damage was done. He'd been compromised. We had to let him go. He disappeared when I was 16. He left voluntarily to avoid termination. We monitored him for several years to ensure he hadn't retained dangerous knowledge or capabilities. Eventually, he integrated back into ordinary civilian life. Different name, different location. As far as we know, he's still alive. Something in that phrasing caught my attention. As far as you know? We lost track of him 8 years ago. Not because he's dead, but because he learned to avoid surveillance. Your father was brilliant, Dr. Cross. But brilliance made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation you just experienced. Reeves gathered the photographs and returned them to the folder. I'm telling you this because you have a right to know, and because understanding what happened to him might help you avoid the same fate. Entity contact can feel like enlightenment when it's actually programming. Subject 18 told you things about your father because Entity 7 told your father things about the facility. History repeating through different vessels. I couldn't speak. My entire understanding of my childhood, my career choice, my presence in this facility, all of it had just been recontextualized in ways I couldn't process. Take the rest of the day, Reeves said, not unkindly. Review the materials. Process what you've learned. Tomorrow we'll discuss next steps for Subject 18's evaluation. But I need you to understand something. Doctor, the entities we contain are sophisticated. They've had centuries, possibly millennia, to refine psychological manipulation. They prey on our need for meaning, for significance, for answers to questions we don't know how to resolve. Resist that. Trust the protocols. Trust the structure. Trust that we're here to protect humanity from things it isn't ready to understand. I stood mechanically. Yes, sir. And doctor? If you experience intrusive thoughts, compulsive ideation, or perceptual distortions, anything that might indicate delayed compromise, report immediately. We have countermeasures. We can help. But only if you're honest about symptoms. Understood. I left his office and walked toward the parking level, each step feeling automatic. Staff members passed without registering as individuals. The facility's familiar corridors suddenly seemed foreign, as if I were seeing them through different eyes. Lena intercepted me at Checkpoint Delta. Hey, you look terrible. What happened? I opened my mouth to explain, then stopped. How much could I tell her? How much should I tell her? Was she compromised? Was I compromised? Was anyone in this place actually what they appeared to be? Interview went badly. I managed. Subject 18 is more sophisticated than expected. She searched my face. That's not all. Reeves briefed me on some classified history. It's a lot to process. You want to grab dinner? Talk it through? Every instinct screamed yes, that Lena was trustworthy, that I needed to confide in someone, that isolation would accelerate whatever psychological trajectory had been set in motion. But Subject 18's words kept echoing. There are others like me working in this facility. Rain check, I said. I need some time alone. Concern flickered across her features. Okay, but call me if you need anything. Seriously. Anything. I will. Thanks. I made it to my car and sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes before starting the engine. The photographs kept flashing through my mind. My father, younger, working in the same facility where I now spent my days, standing in the same corridors, interviewing the same kinds of entities, being compromised the same way. Subject 18 claimed I was being compromised. History repeating through different vessels. I drove home on autopilot, barely registering traffic or turns. My apartment felt even more temporary than usual, a space I occupied but never truly inhabited. I made coffee I didn't drink, and opened my laptop with no clear purpose. Then I started searching. Personnel files, facility history, employment records, public databases for background information on key staff members. Everything I could access without triggering security alerts. Mitchell Reeves. No records prior to 18 years ago, just as Subject 18 claimed. His supposed academic credentials traced back to universities that confirmed someone with that name attended, but the dates didn't align properly. His published research existed but was sparse and generic, lacking the depth expected from someone directing a facility like Holding. I expanded the search. Captain Brenner, 5 years at holding. Previous military service in units that were heavily classified but verifiable. That checked out. Dr. Frost, neurologist with legitimate credentials and publication history going back 15 years before his facility recruitment. Also verifiable. But there were others, staff members whose backgrounds seemed slightly too perfect, whose employment histories had gaps that official explanations attributed to classified work. But that didn't quite feel right. Small inconsistencies that individually meant nothing but collectively formed a pattern. I pulled up my father's name, Thomas Cross, the records I'd always known, birth certificate from Columbus, Ohio, academic records from state universities, marriage license to my mother, my own birth certificate listing him as father, then the missing person report filed by my mother 2 weeks after he disappeared. Cold case status, no resolution. But now I searched differently. Federal databases I had clearance to access through facility authorization. And there, buried in archived personnel records requiring Level 5 clearance that I technically shouldn't have but had inherited through administrative oversight, was his name, Thomas Cross. Consultant. Entity Communication Specialist. Employed at Holding from its operational inception until termination of contract 17 months before my birth. 17 months. I did the math. My parents had been married 3 years before I was born. My father had been working at Holding during that entire period, had left just before my mother became pregnant, had lived an apparently normal life for 16 years before vanishing without explanation. On his 27th birthday, the same age I was now approaching in 4 months, my hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I wanted to dismiss this as coincidence, as pattern-seeking in random data, as the exact kind of paranoid thinking Subject 18 was designed to trigger. But the evidence was right there, documented in official federal records. I kept searching. Employee retention statistics over 4 decades. Turnover rates that initially seemed high but weren't excessive for high-stress security work. Except when I filtered by specific categories, patterns emerged. Staff who worked directly with entities for more than 3 years showed decreased communication with outside contacts, decreased financial activity unrelated to facility employment, decreased digital footprint in public spaces. They didn't leave so much as they faded, became less themselves and more extensions of whatever they were proximally exposed to. I opened the facility's medical database. Psychological evaluation scores for all staff members, tracked quarterly to monitor for compromise. My own score showed consistent baseline across 11 years. Unusual stability that should have been statistically improbable given the work environment. Most staff showed gradual shifts. Small changes in personality metrics. Minor alterations in cognitive patterns. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger intervention protocols, but enough to demonstrate measurable drift. Except for a select few. Myself included. Lena Ortiz. 3 researchers I'd worked with closely. We were the outliers, the ones who didn't shift, the controls. My phone buzzed. Text from Lena. Seriously, are you okay? You left looking like you'd seen a ghost. I stared at the message. She was one of the outliers too, someone who hadn't drifted despite years of exposure. Was that because she was like me, naturally resistant? Or because she was something else entirely? Maintaining a baseline human performance while being fundamentally changed underneath. I typed, just processing. Need some space. Her reply came immediately. Okay, but I'm here if you need me. Whatever happened today, you're not alone. You're not alone. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt ominous. Because I was alone in a way I'd never fully acknowledged. Alone with knowledge that couldn't be unlearned. Alone with suspicions that investigating further would only confirm. Alone in a facility that might have been using me as an experimental subject for 11 years without my awareness. I closed the laptop and moved to the window. Henderson stretched out below, ordinary and mundane. People living regular lives, unaware that 40 miles away, entities that violated natural law were being held in underground cells. Unaware that those entities might not actually be imprisoned but processed. unaware that everything they understood about reality might be carefully curated fiction. Or maybe I was the one living in fiction. Maybe Subject 18 had done exactly what he was designed to do, plant doubts that would metastasize into paranoia and eventually psychological collapse. Maybe Reeves had shown me those photographs as part of therapy, preparing me to resist exactly this kind of manipulation. But the database records weren't manipulated. The inconsistencies in personnel files weren't fabricated. The patterns were real. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Text message. You're asking the right questions. I stared at it for 30 seconds before responding. Who is this? Someone who worked at Holding before you. Someone who investigated the same things you're investigating now. Someone who got out. How did you get this number? Your father gave it to me. Before he disappeared. He made me promise that if anyone from his family ever started working there, I'd watch for signs they were noticing what he noticed. I've been monitoring you for 11 years, Dr. Cross, waiting for you to start seeing. My heart was pounding now. Where is my father? Safe, hidden, maintaining the kind of life that keeps him off their radar. He can't contact you directly. They monitor you too closely. But he wanted you to know he didn't abandon you. He left to protect you from inheriting his obligations. What obligations? The ones Subject 18 mentioned. Your father made an agreement before you were born. Access to knowledge in exchange for eventual collection. He thought he could game the system, learn enough to break free. It didn't work. So he ran. And he's been running ever since. How do I know you're real? That this isn't part of the manipulation? You don't. You can't. That's the point. Once you start questioning what's real, every answer becomes suspect. Every source of information becomes potentially compromised. That's how they keep you isolated, confused, compliant. Then what am I supposed to do? Keep investigating. Document everything. Trust your own observations. And when the time comes, and it will come soon, decide whether you want to run like your father did, or stand and fight for answers he couldn't find. The conversation ended. No matter how many times I texted back, no response came. I sat on my couch in the growing dark, phone in hand, mind cycling through possibilities. Someone was watching me. Either facility security monitoring for signs of compromise or someone external monitoring for signs of awakening. Maybe both. Maybe neither. And I was simply experiencing exactly the paranoid spiral that effective entity manipulation produced. But I couldn't unknow what I'd learned, couldn't unsee the patterns, couldn't unask the questions now circulating through my thoughts like razors. Tomorrow I would return to Holding, would walk those corridors, would interface with colleagues who might or might not be entirely human, would continue evaluating Subject 18 unless Reeves decided the risk was too great. And I would watch. I would notice. I would document. Because whether this was manipulation or revelation, the only way forward was through understanding. Even if that understanding destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life, my work, and the facility that had consumed the last 11 years. 4 months until I turned 27. 4 months until whatever happened to my father might happen to me. 4 months to decide whether to run, fight, or surrender to whatever inheritance I'd been born into. I returned to Holding the next morning with barely 2 hours of sleep behind me. Everything looked identical. Same checkpoints, same corridors. But I saw it differently now. Watched how people moved. Listened to speech patterns. Noticed micro-expressions that didn't align with claimed emotions. Lena intercepted me at sublevel 2 with coffee. You look terrible. Didn't sleep much. I accepted the cup gratefully. We need to talk, privately. Section C maintenance access, 1800 hours. Her expression was grave. Camera coverage has gaps there. I nodded once. She moved on, the exchange brief enough to seem casual, but my pulse accelerated. Either she'd discovered something critical or she was compromised and leading me into isolation. Trust no one. Trust everyone. Both paths led to madness. Reeves summoned me at 0900. His office screens displayed data I couldn't interpret from the doorway. Sleep well? He asked without turning. Well enough. Your vitals suggest otherwise. Now he faced me. Learning about your father would naturally cause disturbance. I should have prepared you better. It's manageable. Is it? Because I'm seeing compromise patterns. Not from subject 18 directly, from information exposure itself. Knowledge can infect as severely as direct entity contact. He studied me. I'm offering a choice. Continue with enhanced monitoring, or transfer to other duties until you've processed this. A test. Everything was a test. Accept meant sidelining. Refuse meant scrutiny. I want to continue, I said. Subject 18 requires further evaluation. Stopping wastes gathered data. You understand the risk? I accept it. Modified protocol then. 30-minute sessions. Enhanced neural monitoring. I'll observe directly. Any compromise sign, immediate extraction. Non-negotiable. Understood. Session at 1100. Prepare accordingly. The next interview was different. More equipment, 4 guards instead of 2. Portable MRI components I'd never seen before. Real-time brain mapping, the technician explained, detects mimetic influence before conscious awareness. Tested? In simulation, this is field application 1. Perfect. I was simultaneously evaluator and experiment. They fitted extensive monitoring, sensors at temples and skull base. Once cleared, I entered interview room 7. Subject 18 arrived in standard restraints. When they removed his hood, his eyes tracked everything with perfect precision. Not calculating escape, just observing, taking inventory. The guards left. The door sealed. You look exhausted, he said, voice carrying genuine concern. Investigating kept you up? Let's focus. 30 minutes. I intend to use them efficiently. Efficient, very you. Professional distance, data collection over conversation. He tilted his head. But you searched records, found inconsistencies, started seeing patterns. I didn't confirm. Today's focus. Operational methodology, target identification, influence establishment, end objectives. My objective is helping you survive what's coming. Truth, whether you believe it or not. Help by answering questions. You already know I'm not hostile. I had opportunity during our first session. Sufficient information to create collapse, but I didn't. That's not my purpose. Then what is? Catalyst. Accelerating awareness in those with capacity to understand. Your father had it. You inherited it. But capacity needs activation. And you activate me. I'm here because they brought me. But yes, catalytic function. Whether you accept what it produces, your choice entirely. We continued. He deflected specific questions, provided actionable suggestions for investigation, explained that my 11 years of baseline stability was statistically impossible without deliberate protection, that I'd been kept clean while others drifted, that my 27th birthday was decision point, demonstrate inherited potential, or get classified expendable. When Reeves's voice interrupted, session elapsed, exit immediately. Subject 18 added one final piece. Lena Ortiz isn't compromised. Clean baseline like you, she's investigating too. Found something, trust her. She's the only person here definitely what she appears to be. Guards extracted him. I emerged shaking. Reeves waited outside. My office, now. In his office, he confronted me with medical documents. Brain scans of my father showing wrong activity patterns. Psychological evaluations describing cognitive bleed. Entity perspectives infiltrating thought processes. Loss of self-concept. The person I remembered had ceased existing before disappearing. He volunteered as test subject, Reeves explained. Believed neural interface would unlock capabilities. It worked, but cost him his mind. We tried helping. He refused. Claimed we suppressed his evolution. Classic entity rhetoric through human voice. He showed termination recommendations. He left before intervention, became progressively less himself. Then came treatment papers, medical leave, psychiatric intervention, cognitive reset protocols. I promised your father I'd protect you, Reeves said. We were friends before he was a subject. I watched him deteriorate. I won't lose another brilliant mind. Something about his intensity felt wrong. Too invested. Too personal. I need 24 hours, I said. Time accelerates the bleed. Then I'm like my father. Forcing treatment makes me resist harder. I stood. 24 hours. Then I decide. Voluntarily. He agreed reluctantly. Constant monitoring. Emergency protocols at any compromise sign. I left reeling. Every piece contradicted something else. I needed verification. Someone trustworthy. 1,800 hours. Lena. At 17:45, I reached Section C. Lena waited with a tablet. 6 minutes before cameras cycle back, she said immediately, "Look at this. Personnel records, turnover patterns. For 15 years, normal. Then 25 years ago, shift. Fewer departures, long-term retention. Now biometric data." She pulled up age markers. 12 individuals show zero aging over 10 years, locked at specific ages. She highlighted names: Reeves, Brenner, senior researchers, security personnel. Surveillance footage, Reeves 18 years ago. The video showed him identical to now. Last week? Still identical. No aging whatsoever. Cross-referenced external databases, these 12. Zero presence outside facility documentation, like they don't exist anywhere except here. My hands went numb. Subject 18 is right, she said. Non-human entities work here and they control it. What do we do? I've copied everything. We extract Subject 18. Get him to witnesses who can verify what he is. There's a journalist in Phoenix. Footsteps. Time up. Tomorrow night. 2,200 hours. Be ready. We separated. Everything accelerated now toward confrontation I wasn't prepared for. That evening, the mysterious texter. Running out of time. They know. Tomorrow is last chance. I responded. Planning extraction. Need exit route. Reply. Route prepared. Drive north. Route 95. 15 miles. Abandoned gas station. Park behind. Someone will meet you. Who? Someone who got out. My father. No response. The next day crawled. At 2200, I met Lena at Section C. She wore tactical gear. 40-minute window before lockdown, she said. We descended to sublevel 3 through service passages, reached interview room 7's monitoring station. Subject 18 sat restrained in darkness. Right on schedule, he said without surprise. We're extracting you, I said, releasing restraints. Can you cooperate? I can, but no, this extraction is being allowed. You're being tested. Then we adapt. Your planned exit through cargo bay, they expect that. Alternative exists, emergency tunnel, but using it means going deeper, sublevel 4, where oldest entities are kept. There's no sublevel 4. The facility you access has 3 levels. Actual facility extends deeper. Want answers about your father? You need to see what's down there. Alarms wailed. Lockdown early. Decision now, Subject 18 said. Surface exit through compromised routes, or deeper descent toward truth you might not survive. Lena grabbed my arm. We move. Now, which direction? I thought of my father. 27 years running. We go down, I said. Subject 18 led us to hidden stairs descending into impossible darkness. The descent lasted too long. Air grew wrong. Pressure, density, weighted with presence. We reached a steel door, submarine-style wheel mechanism. Beyond here, Subject 18 warned, you see what this facility actually is. Once you see, you can't unknow. Certain? I turned the wheel. Cathedral-sized space. Bioluminescent walls. Dozens, hundreds of entities in cultivation chambers, all connected through neural tissue networks. This is real holding, Subject 18 said. Sublevel 317, public displays. This is actual work, cultivation, integration, preparation for next phase of human development. We moved deeper, past chambers of impossible things some watched, others remained dormant, all radiating ancient patient purpose. Staff above are hybrids, he continued. Human bodies, entity consciousness. Regular staff are experiments. Control groups, some recruited. Others released carrying unconscious modifications passed to offspring. Generational programming toward integration. Central chamber. Massive entity suspended in glowing fluid. Ancient beyond comprehension. The director, Subject 18 said, initiated this operation 40 years ago. Your father met him, was offered choice between integration and exile, chose exile, but you represented future potential. Everything in your life. Preparation for this moment. What choice? But I knew. Integration or elimination. Accept enhancement or refuse and be hunted like your father. Lena raised her weapon at Subject 18. This was just to bring him here? To give informed choice. Your father wasn't prepared. He looked at me. You can refuse, attempt exposure, but refusal means they hunt you. Refusal? Exposure means discrediting. No winning move except theirs. The entity moved. Pressure built in my skull. He's offering connection, Subject 18 said. Understand what your father learned, or maintain separation and ignorance. Choose now. I looked at Lena, at the entity, at the vast cultivation chambers. If I accept, do I stop being myself? You become more. Parts remain but integrated into larger consciousness. Enhanced, freed from limitation. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give. Pressure increased. The entity waited. What made my father refuse? He saw individual autonomy absorbed into collective purpose, valued independence over evolution. Pause. Whether wisdom or fear, still being determined. I need time, I said. The entity stilled. Pressure released. Time isn't infinite, Subject 18 said, but extension granted. When your birthday arrives, 4 months, you'll be summoned. Then you must decide. And if I refuse? You follow your father's path. Hope you run faster. He led us back up. Sub-level 3 showed controlled chaos, searching methodically, not desperately, going through motions. They'll let you leave, he confirmed. Your extraction recorded as successful, monitored but not apprehended. At cargo bay, Lena had commandeered a van. Subject 18 climbed out. My part is done, he said. Drive north. Follow instructions. You'll find answers. He surrendered to converging security. We crashed through gates. Desert stretched ahead. 20 minutes of silence. What did we see? Lena asked. Proof or elaborate operation? Can't tell anymore. We found the abandoned gas station. A figure waited in shadows. My father stepped into headlights. Older, weathered, but unmistakably him after 27 years. I approached slowly. You look like her, he said quietly. Your mother. You're alive. Changed but alive. Couldn't let you go through this alone. Years of absence hung between us. Is it true? I asked. Some version. Holding prepares humanity for transformation without consent. He nodded to Lena. Your data is solid. Then we expose it, Lena said. He shook his head. They have decades of protection, resources you can't match. People don't want to believe. Implications too destabilizing. Then what do? We survive. Stay hidden. Document. Wait for the right moment. Pause. Or you make different choice. Accept integration. Change it from inside. I couldn't. Maybe you can. That's not real choice. No choice here is real. All compromised. I chose survival and exile. You can choose same. Or gamble on something different. 4 months. 4 months to determine if my father's path was wisdom or cowardice. If Subject 18's offer was evolution or annihilation. If remaining human meant free or ignorant. The van idled. Lena waited. My father watched with eyes that had faced this same decision decades ago. Somewhere beneath Nevada desert, entities cultivated humanity with immortal patience. Dawn approached. But standing in that abandoned gas station shadow with my father alive and truth exposed, I existed in threshold space, neither captured nor free, neither human nor transformed, neither ignorant nor enlightened, just aware. Terribly, inescapably aware. That awareness was both burden and gift, curse and opportunity. 4 months to decide what to do with it.